So it's 2017, it's a new year, and we're still here. So we're back. It's COMP2106, our first lesson of advanced server-side scripting. So we spent the first part of class kind of just talking about the course, getting a bit of a lay of the land with the mean stack, and we want to start kind of getting our feet wet and actually playing around with this stuff with Node. So I've asked everybody to install Node on your machines. There's a very simple way to make sure Node is running. One of the other good things about using Node is it's going to give you familiarity with another tool which you're going to be expected to know as a professional developer, and that is the command line. Okay, probably haven't used command line interface very much before. I guess you've probably used it with Git, with doing Git, haven't done much else with it. So with Node, we're going to typically launch our applications and run them from the command line. So if you want to open up your command prompt or your terminal, and it should take you into your default users directory. So if you're on Windows, it'll probably be users and your username. If you're on a Mac, it should be, I think, USR and your username, or USR bin, your username, some path like that. Okay. Now, typically I create, a course folder and put all my stuff in there. You can put your files anywhere on your computer, but because we run them from the command line, it's probably easier to do them all within this directory, because every time we open our command prompt, this is where we are by default. You can change that path in your environment variables. It's kind of a pain. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a COMP2106 folder here, and then I'll make weekly folders for each class, just like I've done in previous courses. Okay. So I could create a directory through Windows. I'm actually just going to do it here at the command prompt. So to create a new directory, I'll just run the command mkdir for make directory, and I'll call it COMP2106 Winter 2017. You don't need the Winter 2017 because all of you are going to pass this course, and it's the only time you're ever going to take this course. So you can just create a directory called COMP2106. So I'll hit enter. And now I want to go into that directory and make a lesson 1 folder. So we can use the CD change directory. Now we're inside our new folder, and I'm going to make one more directory, which I'll call lesson 1. So I'll run an mkdir. Again, you don't have to do this through the command prompt. You could just do it through Windows. But we're going to be working in here anyway. And then I'll do one more CD command to go inside the lesson 1 folder. CD lesson 1. To check what's in my folder, there shouldn't be anything here. We just built it 2 seconds ago. If I run the dir, or if you're a Mac user, the ls command, it'll show you what's inside of that folder, which is nothing. No files, no subdirectories. But all the files I'm going to create today, I'm going to put in here. Next week, I'll make a lesson 2 folder. And then like we've done in the past, I'll also tie each week to a GitHub repository. So I'll make a new repository for every lesson. At the end of class, push my stuff up to GitHub so you have access to it. Okay. So now what I want to do is open up my code editor. I'm going to use WebStorm. You can use whatever code editor you want to try, Visual Studio Code, Atom, brackets, whatever you like. And I'm going to open up, use that editor and browse into my new folder that I've created, and we'll create some Javas. I think we'll do probably 4 Node files and a couple text files. So I'm going to open up WebStorm. Oh, sorry. Before I do one other thing, I said we should check to make sure Node is installed. To do that, we can just run the command node -v. That should tell you what version of Node is installed. If you get a message saying Node is not recognized, you didn't install it correctly. If you did install it correctly, you'll get the version number that you've installed. Mine's a little out of date. I probably should upgrade it. This was the version I installed back in September. So I should probably install it. Some of you probably have a version starting with 7, I imagine. Anybody have a version 7 plus?
I think they just brought out version 7. I think the latest, that's like, I don't know, beta or whatever.
Yeah. So it may not be the full release for 7 yet. It's probably 6.9. It was really weird. A year ago they were on version 0.12, and then the next version was 4.6. I'm not exactly sure how they managed that. And now they're on to 6, and I guess 7 is, I think, in beta. So if I go to the Node site. Yeah, so 7.4 has the latest features. It's not the full release. It's still in beta. So 6.9.4 is the latest kind of stable version.
I'm guessing they're following Ubuntu's thing, like 6 is 2016 and 7 is going to be 2017.
Yeah, so they went to that a couple years ago because it is a Linux-based system. So long as you have some version of Node, you're good to go. And if not, well, go to Node.js and download the installer, let it run, and then run the command again. So I'm going to open up WebStorm. And I'm going to open up that new lesson 1 folder that I created. So it's inside my lesson 1. So these are the 2 folders I just made. So I'll just open that up. It'll open quickly because it's blank. It doesn't have to load any files. So this looks quite a bit like PHP Storm, which I used last winter in our Intro to Web Programming course. Again, if you're not using WebStorm, no problem. Use Atom, use brackets, use VS Code. It's all the same. So we want to create our first Node file. We'll make it really simple. We have to do hello world. It's kind of a rule of programming. So I'm going to right-click my folder, choose New, and if I choose JavaScript file, it'll automatically assign a .js extension. If you hit New File, which is at the top, you'll have to supply the extension. So I'm just going to choose New JavaScript file. I will call Hello World. I'll leave the extension off. It will WebStorm will automatically tack on the .js extension. And like PHP Storm, it automatically gives me that 3-line comment, date stamping it, and putting my username as the author of the file. I can change that or get rid of it if I want. All we want to do is run this file from the command line and have it print a message. And I know you guys printed messages in JavaScript in Tom's class, so what function would I use in JavaScript to print that message? Remember, we're not in a browser here. Yeah, we'll use console.log. World's simplest Node.js file. So the great thing about Node is the JavaScript we write on the back end in Node is really same syntax or similar syntax to what we've been writing on the front end, what you've been doing for a year already. The big difference is that we're going to get into callbacks and asynchronous code as well. So there's our file. To run it, I just pull up my command prompt and run the command node hello world. You don't even need the extension. You could put on .js, but it's not necessary. So we want to execute this JavaScript file from our command prompt. If I hit enter, it runs the file and it logs out that message to the console. We can use either single or double quotes around strings in Node. The convention is to use single quotes. Now, there's no specific rules around the style of how we code Node, but a couple things to keep in mind. It is case sensitive, and Node uses camel case. So for example, if we're calling a function name, and that name has 2 words in it, the first word is always going to be all lowercase, and the second word will start with a capital letter. If we capitalize both letters, our function is going to throw an undefined error. Okay. So if I use double quotes here, it's still going to run the same way, but the convention will be singles. There is actually, I should put this resource up. I meant to put the link on Blackboard. I will throw this up. A developer put up on GitHub, he developed a style guide, which is neat. So these are not rules you have to follow, but these are conventions that most Node.js developers do follow. So for example, he said, this is right using single quotes, this is wrong. Even though it will work, this is what we're typically going to see. Okay. Same about how the brackets go. So we open a curly brace on that same line in an if statement. So I'm actually going to put this link, and same with camel case. So, we'd have admin user like this. We don't typically use these forms. So I'll throw this link up on Blackboard. I will follow these style rules when I'm coding. I would recommend you do the same, although not required. So I'm going to throw this link. I thought I already had it in the tools and resources. I guess I overlooked it. So I'll put it up here. So that's in tools and resources. You can refer to it anytime. Artem?
Question about semicolon.
Yes.
Do we have to use semicolon?
No, it's not required. So if I take it out,
It should work.
press the up arrow to repeat the last command, still works. However, you're going to see typically in the style guide, you will see semicolons used. They talk about commas. I'm not sure that he mentioned semicolons, actually. Oh, yes, here. Use semicolons. So there's a discussion here, which you can read on your own. So I'm going to use semicolons in my code. It won't break if you leave one out. Your code editor may not like it, though. So your code editor may give you a bunch of errors. So I'm in the habit of leaving them in. It's also, if you're going to work with Node and you may also be doing something else with PHP, it's a bad habit to get out of the practice of using the semicolons, because then you get out of the habit, then you go write PHP and you leave out your semicolons and everything breaks, because PHP will require them. So my suggestion is leave them in.
I've heard some people only put there.
Okay, so there's our first file. Pretty simple. No rocket science here. So let's do a second example now, but this one, we're going to launch it from the command prompt. It's still going to print a message to the command prompt, but we also want to generate an HTTP response so we can actually load it in the browser. So let's make a new JavaScript file. We'll call it server.js. Doesn't really matter what you call it, but I'll call it server. So rather than being a command line only file, we actually want to use, later on we're going to use Express to generate our server. But when you install Node, Node comes with a whole bunch of libraries that we can use. In fact, we should maybe have a look at some of them. So it comes with what it calls core modules. So here are the list when we use that little node installer. Here are all of the modules it comes with, and libraries. So things for parsing query strings, doing SSL, and one of them that it comes with is an HTTP library. So that will allow us to generate and run our own localhost web server by making a reference to the HTTP library. There's also an HTTPS version if we want. So we want to generate our own HTTP server so that we can run things on localhost. When we install Node, we get this library called HTTP. We want to use it. So linking a file in Node is the same as you would do it in PHP. What would we use if we wanted to link an external file in to a PHP page? Yeah, we use require. Well, we use that same function with Node. So I'm going to create a variable called HTTP. We'll talk about the variable in a minute. So here we're requiring or linking to Node's HTTP library. And we're creating a variable with the same name. Now notice, you would have done this in both Tom and Jesse's class. I've prefixed the variable with var. How's this different from what we did last semester? If this was a C# variable, we wouldn't be using var in front of our variable. What would we be using instead? Yes, the data type. Is it a string, an integer, a date? So JavaScript is loosely typed, right? Our variables don't have a specific data type. They're just variables, right? And they can be of any data type. So now that we've linked to this and stored it in a variable, we can use this variable and call functions inside of the Node HTTP library that will allow us to do things like start up a web server. We'll take our HTTP variable that links to the Node module, and inside that library, there's a method called create server. So we don't need Apache, we don't need MAMP, we don't need WAMP. That will run an HTTP server, and we can run HTML pages on it. Now we're going to write our first callback function. Because the idea here is we want to start the server, but the server runs continuously. We don't want to prevent other things from happening. We want that server running, and yet other things can happen at the same time. So we're going to pass in our server, takes a callback, an anonymous function. So this function has no name. I think you did anonymous functions with Tom, if I say so. You've tried to erase it from memory. And our create server takes two parameters. So our HTTP library, we have a request. So what comes in from the browser? And our other parameter is the response. What are we sending back to the browser? And that goes inside of curly brackets. So when we get whenever a request comes in, we want to do send a few things back to the browser. The first one is we're going to send back a header with an HTTP status code. What's the status code should we send back if the request is okay? Yeah, we'd send back 200. Right? If the page wasn't found, we'd send back 404. So HTTP status code okay. Now we want to send some text back and render it in the browser. So we can use response.write So we're going to send that stream of text to the browser. Hopefully it's going to display on the page. And we need to call response end. If we don't, this will hang forever. It'll never finish. And the browser will never display anything without calling end. So we've created the server, but we actually want to call two methods. And in Node, we can actually chain them together. So not only do we want to start the server, but after that closing bracket, we're also going to call the listen function. And this is where we specify a port number. In the video, he used port 8080. When we use Express, Express always runs on port 3000. So I'm going to use 3000. You can use any number you like. 3000 is kind of the default. So I'm going to leave it at 3000. So start a server listening for requests on port 3000. And every time a request comes in, send an OK message to the browser and print that text on the page. We also want, every time our server starts, we also want to just display a message that lets the user know the server's been launched. So this is going to only happen one time. This stuff's going to happen every time we get a new HTTP request. Our server will be listening. So it can handle multiple requests simultaneously. So we should have one message in the command prompt when we first launch this, and then we should be able to try it out in our browser. We'll save that stuff. And now we need to go back to our command prompt to launch this and get our server running. The other thing you're going to notice, when we did this first one, our script just starts and then it ends. In this case, our server, it's not like we just start it and then stop it. When we use that listen function, it's going to stay active. That's what we want, right? We want a server running and actively serving out responses to any request. So once we launch this, our command prompt, it's going to be locked. We won't be able to type or make changes while that server is active. So let's try this. So this time, I'll run node and server. So it immediately runs our console log command on line 17, tells us our server's running, and notice the cursor's flashing. I don't have an active command prompt to run more commands. Command prompt is locked right now. So now we'll try and hit localhost :3000. So that response is now an HTTP response, so we can view that in the browser. If I view my source, notice that's the only text on the page. There's no other HTML. There's no head, there's no body. We'll deal with that stuff later. But our server is serving out a web page in effect.
Why? I just don't understand why our command prompt.
Because this listen, this is active. We've started the server, but it's running. So it's doing this, it's running this process continuously. So we can't issue other commands right now because this server is still active. I'll show, this may help explain a minute. Watch what, let's see what happens. What if we want to change this file? So my server is still running, okay? My command prompt is open. Let's add a little HTML formatting in here. Let's say we want to add an H1 tag around that text, right? Let's make it bold, let's make it larger. You can do this in yours, right? So we've got an H1 tag. So now it's going to print out that response, but rather than being plain text, it'll actually include some HTML. Our response could be anything. Could be HTML. Could be, Chad, coming back to your point earlier, right? That response could be JSON, which is great if we want to write an API. We can send a JSON-based response. Well, let's see what happens. So I refresh, but no change. Because my server is launched, it's still serving out the old version. So now we have to stop the server, which we can do with Control-C. So now my server stopped. Now I can run more commands. See, Artem, now my command prompt is back. What's going to happen when I try and refresh this now? Yeah, you're right. Tyler, you're exactly right, right? We've taken the server offline. So it cannot serve out, it can't respond to HTTP requests because that server's offline.
You just hit Control-C and
Yep, Control and C. So if I want to launch it again, if I just hit the up arrow, it'll repeat my last command. I can launch again. Now it says my server started again. Now my page is back and my change has taken effect, right? You can see obviously that H1 tag is here. Right, so there's our H1. It's here now. So that server, Artem, stays running. That's why the command prompt is locked, because the server is active. In effect, our website is online.
It would be cool if this would be not feel locked.
Well, we have a couple of options. The first one is generally this is a big pain. Every time we make a change, we don't want to have to stop and start the server, right? That's a huge waste of time. So there is a tool we'll install later on that monitors our site for changes and will do auto restarts. So we'll be using that tool. There's a few different tools. The most popular one is called NodeMon. Stands for Node Monitor. It monitors your node site for changes and restarts automatically, which is good. If I really wanted to do something in this directory at the same time, I could do it this way. I have another workaround. I can open the second command prompt, right? So like, let's say I want to push to Git right now, but I want to keep it running. I could do all my GitHub stuff in a second command prompt if I need to. So we're also going to use the command prompt when we run MongoDB. So we'll install MongoDB and we'll use it in week 5. We'll want to run a local instance of MongoDB. We'll need a separate command prompt to start the local database server, and we'd have to keep that running. If we turn it off, well, our database is offline. And then later on, we'll use a free cloud service for hosting our MongoDB on MongoDBs in the cloud. And then we don't have to run it locally anymore, although it's faster. Want to show you one other thing. So notice I started this off. It shows my message, my server's running. If I refresh the page, is it going to print this message again or no? Well, let's see. Oops. Go back. So notice my command prompt didn't change. So because my server is active, it can respond to any HTTP requests, but this line only happens once. It only happens when the servers first launch. Now the server is live and active and listening and handling requests as they come in. This response.end part is critical though. If I take this out, I don't recommend it, but I'm going to change mine just so you can see. So I'll take out the response.end. I'll stop my server and restart it. My server's running again. And this will just go on and on and on. I'm not getting a server not found like we did when I stopped it, but it will never complete without that response.end.
You're not gonna get any server timeouts or anything?
Probably eventually I will. If I let it run long enough, it'll time out eventually.
Is there a console log on it? Or is it just
Well, the console log says my server's running, right? Because the server is running. It just, it's never finished the response. Okay, it's still waiting, basically, for something to finish. So it'll just hang. Yeah, it'll probably time out, but it could take, I don't know how long it'll take to time out. Longer than I care to wait for it to time out, really. Okay. All right. There, I stopped it. So that response.end is critical. Now, the other thing, we could actually combine these two lines. Response.end, you could also pass HTML here. A response.write accepts a string, but we could even just leave this whole line out. So this should print it here and then print the second one. That'll work. So now I should have two headings. So response.end allows us to also stream text in our response. There's our code. So this is super fast. We can run it all on our local machine. We don't have to FTP back and forth up to a web server. We don't have to put some other server running. This is super lightweight. And when we want to put it online, which I think we'll do today by the end of the class, we can just deploy to GitHub and then connect that up to a service like Azure or Heroku. Put our stuff online. So I think we'll actually do that today. Any questions so far? All right. If not, we're going to do two other files and then we'll be, Matt?
So basically, if you have an API that doesn't have any authentication, all it is doing this, connecting, pulling that from your database and writing the response.
You got it. So typically the way that the authentication works, well, one, your API may be public. So maybe anybody can access that API and pull your data, right? The other option is, the way most APIs work for security is they give you a key, right? They'll provide a key to you. So let's say we want to pull like your Twitter feed, right? Twitter will give you an ID and a secret, much like when we generated reCAPTCHA codes from Google for PHP. And you just provide those as part of the URL. And that identifies that you should have access, right? So long as you provide a valid key or a secret. So it would look something like this. Actually, I could show you a document. So here was an API I had to work with. Here it is. Where is it? Good. Yeah, so here's your document. So this site, what it is a video library of exercises. So but it's subscription only. So they had an API. So if you had access, you could embed and display those videos and pull them right into your own web application. Okay. So it would be seamless. So the way that would work, if I wanted to pull information in that API, so Matt, here's one of the URLs. API v2, right? If I wanted to check, are we not moving around enough? Do I need to dance? You don't want to see that. So here is an API call to check whether an email address exists in the system. So you pass in the email and you pass in the client ID and secret they supply to you. So before they would return any function call, it would verify those credentials. And if those credentials are valid, it sends you back a JSON response telling you if that email exists or not. So that's super easy to do with Node. Right?
Like you said, because there wouldn't be a lot.
So we could use it instead of Ajax
Absolutely.
request.
Absolutely. We could do it instead. We might use jQuery and Ajax to make a remote call, to initialize the call. We could. But if we want to build our own API, yeah, this would be simple. Because we can even write in the header, we could even do something like this. Specify what type of response. My syntax may be a little off here, but we can specify that our response is JSON, our response is plain text, our response is text/HTML. And we see those headers actually here if we look in our console. Right, there's our 200 status code, and we can see that it's HTML, that's the default, but we could set that to JSON easily if we're building an API. And in fact, that's basically what we'll do. We'll build this out and build HTML responses in the first part of class. Once we add in Angular, Angular takes over the whole front end, and our whole back end, all we do is send JSON to Angular. And Angular will Okay, so I think what I'd like to do, let's take another break. Let's take 10 minutes, not 20 minutes, though, please. And we may even be able to get out of here a little bit early. And then what I want to do, the last example I want to do is also from the video. I'm going to create 2 text files, and we're going to write the node code. We're going to write 2 versions, a blocking version that will read the data from the files and print stuff out to the screen, to the command prompt. And then we'll write a non-blocking version. And we'll see how those behave and how those perform. Okay, we'll do those. Then the last thing we'll do today is we'll take our code, we'll push it to GitHub, and we'll get connected to a cloud service, maybe to Heroku, and we'll deploy our node stuff to Heroku. It's very easy. Okay? So the link to Heroku, I think I put on Blackboard. So if you don't have a Heroku account, you can set one up for free. Oh no, I didn't put it up. It's Heroku.com. There you go. You can create 5 free websites here. But it will also work. You can also deploy to Azure. I suggest you try Heroku. Well, if you want to use Azure, you can use Azure. Okay, I'm going to stop the video stream, and we will come back at 5 after 5.